What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota, Danny Adeljabar.
Yep.
This is take two. So, guys, we just recorded about an hour and 45-minute podcast on this subject, and the audio got messed up. So, like good troopers, we're not going to complain about it. We're just going to get back into the studio, record this episode again, and let's just get going. Fuck it. All right, so the topic today, obviously the big thing in the news right now is the Iranian attack on Saudi Arabia, or should I say the alleged attack on Saudi Arabia right now. So in the greater context of everything, this is just another stage in the war in Yemen right now. And I'm sure you guys have read the news. Mike Pompeo, the State Department, mainstream media, basically all the fingers are being pointed at Iran for this recent drone strike or cruise missile strike on the largest oil processing facility in the world. So just to give you some context on this facility that was struck. So it was located in eastern Saudi Arabia. I mean, it still is located. It wasn't totally destroyed. But this, the Abqaiq oil processing facility, it was the largest in the world. It has the capacity to process about 7 million barrels of crude oil a day.
That is 5% of the world's oil, by the way.
That is 5% of the world's oil supply. And, the facility includes, pumping stations and gas oil separation plants and all that other fun stuff. And it has an extension of pipeline networks that go from east to west. Just to give you some background on Saudi Arabia and how, I guess, their oil infrastructure works, is that most of their oil infrastructure is located on the east coast of the country. The major population centers are located on the west coast of the country, as well as the holy cities, and their pipelines go from east to west. So usually, when the gas fields are there as well. So the oil and gas fields are all on the East Coast as well. So they go from one pipeline to the processing plant, and then they're either put in a pipeline and shipped over to the western coast, which would go into the Red Sea, and they would go through the Suez Canal or down or down into through the Allenby Strait. Most of the oil is shipped out into the Strait of Hormuz. Strait of Hormuz is the most important choke point in the world. About 20% of the world's oil supply is shipped out of there. So it was a huge hit because about 5 million barrels of crude oil were essentially they were delayed. They were stopped. They were delayed from being put out into the market. And instantly what you saw when that happened was that there was a spike in oil prices, but the oil prices, they gradually went back down to about $58 a barrel right now.
Right.
So what a lot of people are saying, the problem with this whole story is that there's all these different conflicting narratives. So there's one narrative is that the Houthis did it, and that makes perfect sense because the Houthis have been at war with Saudi Arabia for the past, really
5
forever.
Years, really. Most recently, like the last 5 years or so.
Yeah, most recently the past 5 years ago. The cycle of violence that we're witnessing right now goes back to 2015, but in reality, Saudi Arabia and Yemen have been... there's been some type of cycle of violence between the two countries, or there's been civil war in Yemen for decades upon decades, really since the 1960s. And just to give you kind of a quick crash course on the war in Yemen right now, the war that we know it, obviously there's so much history to this, but we want to just pack this up into like a minute or two. So the U.S. got involved in Yemen in 2011 when Barack Obama was president. And basically what happened is that Obama bribed the then president, his Saleh, who was president for many, many years, with arms so we would be able to unleash a drone war on Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. What ended up happening is that Saleh, the president of Yemen at the time, he went ahead and when he was given those arms, he actually went to war with the Houthis. And this is early in this decade. So what ended up actually happening is that Saleh went to war with the Houthis, and he ended up actually getting hurt in an assassination attempt. And when he was out on sick leave from being president, the Saudis and the U.S., they actually installed a new guy into Saudi Arabia, a new president by the name of Hadi. That's the guy who...
He's a total hottie.
The hottie who was a total hottie. Used that joke before. Thanks for remembering it.
I guess you bring it up.
the name, I guess the name flies pretty well.
Yeah.
But what's really funny about this guy Hadi is that it was an uncontested election, essentially meaning that Hadi was the only person on the ballot on this election. So when you think about it, wasn't really an election at all. Yeah. And what's really funny is that Hillary Clinton, she said that this was a shining moment in democracy. So the irony is that Hillary Clinton probably would have loved that sort of democracy when she was running, or she thought that she was the only person on the ballot when she was running.
That seems to be true the way that she ran her campaign.
Yeah, I know. So to make a long story really short, this guy ends up being a real loser. He ends up fleeing the country in 2015 when the Houthis, they attacked Sana'a. And after that, the Saudis installed this guy, so this is their guy. They want a Saudi-friendly person in that office, mainly just to give them favorable policy as far as like contracts and pipeline constructions and port access and all of that stuff. So they went to war with the Houthi government. Well, not the Houthi government, against the Houthis, who were the rebellion,
right? Mm-hmm.
The separatists in Yemen, and they took the side of the government, which basically fled the country. And Yemen is probably one of the most horrific wars in the world right now. There's so many different estimates of the casualties, but we can confidently say that there's most likely been over 100,000 casualties just due to the war. There is no telling how many casualties that there have been just due to the starvation,
record famine,
lack of medical supplies,
cholera outbreaks,
and this is all due to the blockades and just the overall hell on earth environment that these people are living in right now. So, as you can imagine, that many Houthis are not really fans of the Saudis.
Right.
And what is interesting is that there's been a narrative over the past
2 days, yeah.
The narrative over the past decade is that Iran has been a patron of the Houthis.
Right.
So the problem is that there's conflicting reports and there's conflicting evidence that's contrary to that kind of blanket statement that Iran supports the Houthis. Now, there was actually a cable from WikiLeaks that came back it was in 2009 that actually contradicted that. It said that Iran was actually giving very little military support to the Houthis, and most of their support was really just in name only. And a lot of the weapons that the Houthis were actually getting, they were from stockpiles from the Yemeni government, from the Yemeni military.
That they had seized in
that they had seized or they bought on the black market, right, or one of another million ways. So that narrative that Iran backs the Houthis, although there probably is true to some extent, it's not 100% credible and it's not 100% black and white. The problem is with this narrative is that the way that people portray it is that it's a battle between Sunnis and Shiites. Now, yes, Saudi Arabia, they're Salafist Sunnis. The Houthis, they are Zaydi Shiite. But here's two issues. So they conflate the Houthis with Iran is because they're both Shiites. Now, Zaydi Shiites and Twelver Shiites, which they are in Iran, are not the same thing. They're actually very different from each other. Twelvers in Iran, the majority of the Shiite world are Twelvers. They actually look at Zaydi Shiites as, you know, as kind of an abomination. It's not really what they would call a Shiite. And it's funny because the Zaydi Shiites actually have a lot more common theologically with Sunnis. So this Houthi movement is way more of a political movement rather than a religious movement. It's a political movement that is against the Saudi government.
Right. They see themselves as freedom fighters that are trying to take back and liberate their country from foreign intervention, namely Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, but also, to a certain extent, the United States.
Exactly. Now, where we are right now with this whole situation is that, despite this, despite the really horrible conditions, the Houthis have been able to really get their hands on, I wouldn't say the most sophisticated weapons, but they are incredibly resourceful with the things that they do have. So
to get the job done.
Yeah. So why don't you jump into this part,
for sure,
Danny?
And in the first take of the show, we went at great lengths to talk about geography and because that's important, and I'm going to condense that really, really, really quickly. For those of you who are unaware of where Yemen is, it's on the Arabian Peninsula. It's to the south of Saudi Arabia. It's right there on that southern coast, right? And a big portion of why they're having this war is because Saudi Arabia would like port access to get around the Straits of Hormuz. Now, this is important because their biggest cash crop in Saudi Arabia is oil, and the way that they export this oil is through the Straits of Hormuz, and the Straits of Hormuz can easily be shut down by their adversary, Iran, and they would like to remove that leverage point from Iran, and they would like to get around it, and a big portion of this war has to do with that strategic implication of where Yemen sits. Yemen is in the way of Saudi Arabia's oil easy route to export oil. Let's just put it that way, in a very, very easy way. Now, it's also important to remember that Yemen is to the south of Saudi Arabia for this particular conversation, and specifically the region that the Houthis control is in the southeast of Saudi Arabia. It's right along the border, but it's on the the western side, and this is important. Very, very, very important. So, let's talk a little bit about what happened. On Saturday, there was a drone strike or a cruise missile strike. In any case, something got struck. It was their oil facility, this big one that we talked about, has major implications for global oil, but also has major implications for the war that's going on currently. There are three, I think, main narratives that have surfaced since that allege that it wasn't, in fact, the Houthis who conducted this strike, and I'll outline them now. The first point is that
the butler. Sorry, I had to throw that in.
The first point is that
I had to lighten this podcast in because we were both so
annoyed a little bit.
We were so pissed off at the beginning of this show. All right,
we're so happy to do this.
Let's not dwell.
Yeah. Okay. So the first point is that there is a narrative that claims that the Houthis do not have access to technology sufficient enough to be able to carry out a strike that deep into Saudi Arabian territory, particularly because the oil facility is hundreds of miles from even the northernmost areas of Houthi-controlled Yemen. Now, that is important because and we'll unpack that and we'll get to that in a second. But the range here is the issue. They don't think that the drones can fly far enough to get to where they need to hit, and they don't believe that they can be precise enough where they can actually strike and blow up these targets. So that's the first narrative. The second narrative here is the angle of attack, right? We're seeing a lot of new evidence come out very, very recently suggesting that the impact areas of the buildings that were struck were impacted on the northeastern sides of the buildings. And so the question that we have here is how the hell does the Yemeni drones hit on the opposite side of the building where they would have been coming from had they have flown out from the Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen? In this case, what would have to happen is the drone would have to fly over or fly around the target and hit it from the opposite side. And so this is, a little bit questionable as far as how they could have done it. And the way that they're pinning this on Iran is if you draw a rough line from the impact area outwards to the north, you land roughly in the region of Iran and Iraq. And if you're going to be in that region and you want to pick a person that probably did it, it's probably going to be Iran, because we know that they're one of the strongest military forces in the area, that they have the capability to do so. And they just happen to be in the general trajectory of where the drones or the cruise missiles could have been launched from. The third portion of this is around the idea that that Iran wants to strike out against, the embargoes, and that they have this motive to do so, and that the Houthis are just going along with it because they're the proxy. And in fact, this was Iran, for those reasons. I think I covered the main issues. Did I miss anything, Henry?
No, you got everything. And so basically, it's we have one side. Well, we have the Houthis. They're actually taking credit for this. So they're taking credit for this attack. They're like, yeah, of course we fucked up Saudi. That's what we do. We've been. This has been a war of attrition. We're doing everything we can to end this war, and why not go after their main oil facilities? This is probably going to end the war faster, and we have the ability to keep on doing that. Now, that would be a narrative that makes a lot of sense. Now, the other narrative right now from the State Department, a lot of mainstream media outlets, is that this was, you could look at this two ways. So one way would just be on the narrative that Iran supports the Houthis. They're a Houthi proxy like Hezbollah. However, that's really not the narrative that's coming from Mike Pompeo and the mainstream media. The narrative that's coming out is that these missiles came from Iraq, from a Shiite militia. So because of the way they're conducing this is because of the angle that they were hit in, that this was a cruise missile or a drone from the northwest. So that would mean that the Houthis are wrongfully taking credit for this attack, and that Iran is responsible. Iran is the top responsible. They're 6 months away.
They have the drone.
they have the drone. So those are like the two main narratives that you're going to see on this on this thing. The prevailing one, obviously, is the one that's coming from the government. That's usually the one that prevails, unfortunately for everyone in the world, that it came from Iraq. But what we're trying to do as of now is that we're actually not sure. We kind of went on for a good. We went on for a while. We were speaking, and we were like, we don't really know what happened as of right now. We can only really go with our gut feelings, because obviously it really does seem that. Did you lay out? You laid out the drone capability of the Houthis, right? Or
I haven't done that yet.
All right.
I intend to now. So let's talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, let's jump into this, because this is very important to highlight the capabilities that the Houthis actually have. Because I think a lot of people, they're just like, well, how the fuck did they get drones? They're like some third world army in the middle of the desert.
Right.
How do they have any type of capability to have a drone strike?
Right. When you hear drone strike, you think like Predator drone or the Global Hawk or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. So go into that. Explain.
Sure.
What type of drone that we think of when we think of drones, like a Predator drone, the one that was shot down over the Strait of Hormuz not so long ago.
That was a Global Hawk, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
An expensive multi-$100 million drone.
Right. Okay. So
versus what they have.
So first of all, I want to give a shout out to Dave DeCamp, who we spoke to just before the show quickly, and who wrote a really awesome article just about this. I was actually curious about this because when I first read about this story, I know a bunch about military tech, and I knew that the Houthis had drones, but I didn't think, I was along the American narrative. I was like, I didn't know that they can strike that far. And what Dave kind of talks about in his article, he in a very rudimentary way, he points out a few truths, right? And so the first one that we'll start with is that two unnamed U.S. officials on Sunday said that there's no doubt that Iran was behind the attacks, and the reason why was because the Houthis literally couldn't do it. They can't pull it off. They don't have is beyond their scope, and they don't have the capabilities, right? And one of the officials had said, and I'm quoting here, the Houthis have never struck this far afield in the past because we don't think that they have the capability, and the Houthis have never struck in this precise and coordinated a fashion before. Okay, so this is what the unnamed U.S. officials are saying. So what Dave does, is he basically takes a look at some of the areas where the Houthis might have launched a drone strike from, and he picks a fairly far north city called Sadr, right? And draws a line from there to the oil facilities. There were two of them that got struck on Saturday. And so the one was 730 miles away, and the other is 640 miles away, right? And so he brings up an article that the UN investigators on the war in Yemen had reason to believe that current capacity and current ability of Houthi drones, their range was believed to be over 900 miles. So if we're talking about a one-way trip here, then 900 miles is greater than 730 miles by 200 miles, right? And so this is something that was kind of new to me and interesting because I presumed incorrectly the first time around that, they got a drone, they're going to take off somewhere and they're going to drop some bombs, they're going to turn around and come back. And I'm like, well, 900 miles wouldn't get you, the round trip, right? The farthest one, 730 miles, that'd be a 1,400 mile trip back and forth. How the hell are they going to do that? But then I started reading a little bit more about these drones in particular, and the way that they work is different from the way that we think about drones. So when we think about drones, we think about Predator drone, right? The Global Hawk, right? This like giant, awesome, unmanned vehicle that just launches Hellfire missiles like crazy and then, flies around and then comes back. No. These drones are akin to like, a robotic suicide drone, right? No humans are harmed in the attacks because there's no humans in the drone themselves. But what they do is they fly over and they have plenty of bombs inside of them, and they hit their target and they explode right then and there.
It's a little hamster driving it.
It's a bat. It's the 21st century bat bomb.
I'm just thinking of a little hamster with a scarf and a old aviator helmet and glasses. I don't know why.
The poor hamster.
I don't know why that image is in my head. And it's like has a pissed off face, like it's ready to go. All right.
In any case, that's how those drones work, right? So now if we start thinking about the drones that the Houthis have, that they've used before, and I'll talk about a few times that they've used them. When we talk about it that way, we're saying, all right, they don't have to come back. So if we take the Houthis and the UN investigators at their word, they're certainly within the range. They can totally get that far. And so the question is, like, do they have the capability, like the precision, right? And as far as the precision goes, Houthis have demonstrated in the past their ability to use drones and attack quite well. One incident that Dave brings up is, when the Houthis attacked a military parade inside Yemen from far away. And they were able to kill 6 soldiers and wounded several senior officers. And this was like a assassination attempt to like try and get their way.
That's the one in the UAE, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And so let me pull up when that actually happened here. That was January 10th, 2019, right? And basically, in order to, there's like videos of this, so you can actually see it happen, right? The dude's talking on the stage, like riling up his troops, and then suddenly you hear the whiz of the drone, and then it goes off, and then everything goes crazy from there. There's like blood on the ground. It's nuts. But the point is, though, that in order for you to be able to do that at a range, at any range, you have to have like a live feed, front-facing camera, good connection. You also have to like somehow get there undetected, right? You have to literally fly under the radar and perhaps use some passive or active, radar jamming or something like that in order to not be detected and not get shot out of the sky, and then carry out the operation and be able to kill people, right? So the fact that they were able to kill human targets using this thing speaks to the precision and the sophistication of the technology that the Houthis were using, right? There are many other instances of this happening as well, right? So the Houthi regime actually launched a successful drone attack on an oil field deep inside Saudi Arabia. And this happened in August of this year. So just about a month ago. And it caused a fire, in the oil field, but they were able to put a cap on that. And basically that oil field, which is on the border of the United Arab Emirates, is like 750 miles away from any Houthi-controlled territory in Yemen, right? So that kind of demonstrates there the range, right? So we've got an idea of the precision with the attack on the military parade, and we got an idea on the range. Another good example of the range portion of this is that the Houthis actually launched a strike, or at least they claim to have launched a strike on an airport in Abu Dhabi, which is in the United Arab Emirates. It's several hundred miles away from anything that is controlled by the Houthis, and they didn't destroy anything. I think they might have blown up a truck or something like that. They definitely disrupted air traffic for a little while, but there were no casualties. But the point, though, is that they were able to launch an attack that far away. Now, if you ask the United Arab Emirates, they deny the fact that it was Houthi. But, of course, the Houthis say that they did. And then I wanted to look into this a little bit more and figure out what the hell happened. And I learned that they were using a specific type of drone. It was called the Samand 3 drone. And that's what they used in that particular thing. So I'm like, great, cool. I got a name of a drone. I can look it up and I can get the specs. And, of course, Jesus, this thing was hard to find anything on. So I want y'all all to take this information with a grain of salt. This is coming from Uprising Today, which is, I don't know, a questionable website. But this is pretty much the closest I can get to learning about this particular drone. Now, a military official in Yemen, a brigadier named Sari, said that they have stockpiles of ballistic missiles, modified cruise missiles, and all types of recon and attack drones. And he also says that the stockpile that they have plenty of them, and that they can continue to, fight off Saudis or whoever they want for many years. So if you take them on their word, they've got weapons and they've got plenty of them, and they can keep using them and they can keep up the fight. Now, that could be, war propaganda or not, but the one thing that he points out specifically about the Samand 3 is that it has a range of 1,500 to 1,700 kilometers and has been tested in successful operations, especially against those airports. And so 1,500 to 1,700 kilometers. I didn't actually do the math, but on this other article I was reading, 1,500 kilometers is about 930 miles. So 930 miles, again, is well within the range of something that's 750 miles away by, like 200 miles. So, how do these work again? This particular drone explodes on contact. It uses a front-facing camera that it relays that visual to, so that they can be precise. It's got a range, and they can do some damage with it. So this first talking point that we have coming out of the United States government and out of the Saudi government, and a lot of the news media that you might be reading seem to purport that Houthis can't do it. They don't have the tech. But historical evidence seemed to contradict this, right? So, if I'm a betting man, I'm saying The Houthis probably have the technology and the capability to do it, just based on, these reports and these specific incidences in the past. What's your take on this?
Yeah, it definitely seems like they do. If they can fly that way, like, all right, so if the range is there, then like I don't see what's stopping them from making that attack. Like if they're able to, it's what 900.
900-mile range and
yeah,
and
900
the
mile
targets are
range.
750 at most.
The target was
right?
seven. So I mean, it's in the realm of possibility. Obviously,
Right.
Now, again, the Houthis have been using drones for a while now,
Right.
and there's a huge stockpile of weapons. There's a huge stockpile of weapons within Yemen. The other thing to consider, though, is that just make that distinction that these drones. I think what's coming from the State Department, a lot of from the mainstream media, is that like the sense that the mere fact that they have this super advanced technology makes it by default an Iranian connection. That's not the case. Like, you can buy a drone on Amazon.com, attach a missile from it. It's a fucking deadly war animal. You know what I mean?
Right, and a lot of the videos that I had watched, I think those are...
did I just say you can attach a missile to wait,
just put a missile on it, no big
deal.
deal.
I say that? Wait, you would scratch that. A cherry bomb on it, and you can
put a Roman candle at the front.
Put a Roman candle on it. But...
Actually, funny side tangent, like I do have a drone, right? DJI Phantom 3. It's old, but it's fun, and I love filming. It's super cool. But I've seen
naked.
But I've seen so many videos of like idiots online that strap Roman candles to the feet of the drone and like fly them around and like shoot people with it. So like, when we're talking about these Houthi drones, I think a lot of people think, oh yeah, it must be like some shitty, DJI like robot drone that they're like attaching Roman candles to. It's not. But a lot of the parts and a lot of these capabilities are commercially available and are actually pretty easy to come by. And if we're taking the Houthis at their word, they have...
All right, don't give anybody ideas, all right? Now it sounds like you're making... All right.
Well, I'm not giving you specifications. Come on, you got to figure that shit out on your own.
So let's end that
talk track. Yeah,
that talk track right now.
Yeah.
Speaking of
talk tracks,
speaking of things that you should buy, let's just take a quick moment to talk about sex. Good sex. Now you can increase your performance and get that extra confidence in bed. Listen up. BlueChew.com. That's blue like the color blue. Blue Chew brings you the first chewable with the same FDA-approved active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, so you know they work. You can take them anytime, day or night, even on a full stomach. And since they're chewable, they work up to twice as fast as a pill, so you can be whenever that opportunity arises. BlueChew.com is awesome. It is the best way to get. It's the best way to get
a boner.
To get a boner. All right, you took it right out of my mouth. I've been using it for a while, and it 100% works, and it works really well. It's definitely improved my relationship. And everyone, just be honest with yourself. Everyone knows that there's times when they just don't get it up for one reason or another. Whether you're stressed out, whether you're having problems down there, and whether you're single, whether you have a girlfriend, whether you have a wife, whether you have a boyfriend, it really does just make it better, and it improves your sex life. And I mean, I'm a firm believer if you have a good sex life, your relationship in general is going to be a lot better in the future. So take advantage of it, man. It's like we're fucking giving it away for free, man.
And we are.
If you could benefit from extra function and more confidence where it counts, Blue Chew is a fast and easy way to enhance your performance. Most guys talk a good game, but Blue Chew helps you follow through. Blue Chew is prescribed online and shipped straight to your door in a discreet package, so it doesn't say boner pills, and no in-pot doctor visits, no waiting in the pharmacy, and best of all, no more awkwardness. And believe me, it is pretty awkward to ask your doctor for it. They're made in the USA, and since Blue Chew prepares and ships direct, they're cheaper than a pharmacy. Right now, we got a special deal for our listeners. Visit BlueChew.com and get your first shipment free when you use our special promo code BRO. That's BRO. Just pay $5 shipping. Again, that's BlueChew.com, BLUE Chew.com, promo code BRO. Try it free. Blue Chew is a better, cheaper, faster choice, and we thank them for sponsoring this podcast.
Thanks, Blue Chew.
Thank you, Blue Chew.
All right. So we unpacked the first of the three big issues with this not being a Houthi strike. And, while we don't have the strongest, evidence, like I can't point specifically to the specifications of a Saman 3, what we can point to are previous situations where the Houthis have undertaken drone attacks, some at long distances and some with high precision. And we can, I think, safely make an assumption that it is possible that they have the capability to undertake this attack. Now, one thing that I'm not super confident about is the second one. So the second argument is the angle of attack, right? Some recent evidence has come out from the State Department and also from Saudi Arabia, excuse me, that the impact areas of those buildings were facing the northwest. Now, if we go back to our little geography lesson and our map, we remember that the Houthi-controlled areas are to the southeast of these targets.
Just pull up a map of Saudi Arabia. Believe me, it sounds goofy, and it probably is weird if you're like on the subway or something, but just pull it up. It will make a lot more sense.
Right. So if you're looking at the map here, Yemen is sitting underneath Saudi Arabia, and the very western part of Saudi Arabia, right, that's the part that the Houthis have. So I think I misspoke earlier. I said southeast. I meant southwest. Right? Now, they would have to fly northeast to get to those targets, which would mean that if they did a straight line northeast and they would hit the southeast side of those buildings if they had made a straight beeline right to the building. But that's not where the impacts are. The impacts happen to be in the north or the northwest. So, if the Houthis did it, they would either have to fly a big circle around and swoop around to get there, but then that kind of complicates the whole range issue. Or they'd have to completely overshoot it and then turn the fuck around and then hit them from the other side, which doesn't make a ton of strategic sense. I don't know. And this is the point that I literally can't make a determination on. And this is probably the strongest point, at least not that Iran did it, but that the Houthis couldn't do it, in my opinion. And the whole reason is if I'm going to punch you in the face, and I'm standing behind you, for me to reach around your head and somehow connect with the front of your face, that's weird, More likely, if I wanted to punch you and I'm standing behind you, I'm going to hit you in the back of the head. But that's not where the Saudis got hit. They got hit in the face, right? And so this is the part that I can't really make a determination on, man. This is hard,
So here's my I don't really care. I don't really care about. I don't want to say I don't care about the physics of it, but I don't think the physics is that important. There's plenty of reasons why the Houthis could have attacked the northern end of the facility. I don't necessarily think that just because they attacked them, they had to go into straight line projection. There could be those drones. It's not like we know where the drones were launched. We don't even know if it was a drone,
right.
At this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those drones could have came from anywhere. And this actually leads up to another narrative right now. I guess this might be the third narrative. So what the Houthis actually claimed, what's really interesting, is that they had inside help.
Right.
The inside help that didn't really insinuate or reveal who that inside help was, but what you would have to imagine would be the Shiite minority that's in Saudi Arabia right now. So Saudi Arabia is 80% Sunni, Salafist Sunni, so the most orthodox, hardcore Sunni that you could be. and 20% Shiite. Shiites are heavily discriminated against, and I mean heavily discriminated against. Shiite leaders, they are typically publicly executed if they are recognized by the Saudi government as dissenting voices that could cause any type of trouble or dissent among the Shiite population. So they're very brutal to that Shia population. There's been cases of them straight up firing mortars into Shia villages. It's a tough place to practice. It sucks. It sucks to be a Shiite there. So I don't have any proof of this. This has just been speculation, just totally speculation on a lot of people who've actually reported the story. However, but they're saying that, since the Houthis said that they had insider help, it could be insider help from a lot of places when you really think about it. They're jumping to this conclusion that it could have been a Shiite from Saudi Arabia that launched this Houthi drone. There could have been some type of transaction that took place between a Houthi and a Shiite. It could have been smuggled across the border. There's a million different ways where they could have got these drones over. Saudi Arabia, if you're looking at that map, you'll realize that it's actually quite big. It's a huge country. They have, most of it's desert too. Most of Saudi Arabia is a big ass desert. Like the west of Saudi Arabia is all their population centers. So you have Jeddah, Riyadh. You have the holy cities of Mecca, Medina. Then there's mountains in those areas as well. When you go down to around where Mecca is, that's where like the mountain ranges are. On the eastern coast, that's all the oil infrastructure. All the big oil ports are there that go out into the Strait of Hormuz. The center of that, it's really nothing. And I can't imagine that Saudi Arabia is able to cover that entire border if the drones came from there. There's a million ways that you could have got that over there.
Right.
However, we don't really know. We have no idea. Evidence like this will probably never come out when you think about it.
It's like the limpet mines.
Yeah, we still don't know what happened with the limpet mines.
Well, we'll talk about that in a second. But following this narrative, let's just pretend and do a thought experiment here. If this is the case, and they had some inside help from Saudi Arabia, and maybe they were to the north or west or east, just north in general of the facility. We're talking about, this is how the operation would have to go down. First of all, the Houthis would have to establish contact with friendlies on the ground in Saudi Arabia, dissenting voices there, and they would have to arrange this. And then they would have to somehow smuggle across the border, not one drone, several drones, lots and lots of them. So the reports that I'm seeing is like more than 17 of them made connection, and some of them didn't, ended up as duds. So we're talking about a lot of military tech that they'd have to smuggle across the border, across the fucking desert, and then launch the attack and do this completely undetected. If they pulled this off, it would be the craziest operation. And frankly, it would be amazingly embarrassing for the Saudi Arabian government. Because, wow.
What's funny about that is that it is kind of an indictment on Saudi Arabia's air defense, and Vladimir Putin has jumped on the opportunity to say that
to sell some shit,
to sell some stuff. He's like, I had the article up before, and I can go searching for it. But basically, he says you'll have to buy S-300 and S-400 to protect Saudi Arabia. That's why Iran bought them, because they've sold S-300s to Iran. So
everybody's buying them.
Yeah, everyone's buying
Turkey's
them.
buying them. Actually, Saudi Arabia did either they considered it or they actually purchased it. It's unclear to me, but
do you know what's funny though? If everyone in the Middle East had S-300s, the Middle East would be a way more peaceful place.
Probably.
Just every single country in the Middle East just had S-300s.
Probably,
and
S-400s, but those weapons can also be used offensively in addition to defensively. So maybe not. You never know.
I think they would be if Yemen had S-400s.
Well, maybe. My point is, all right. So this idea that it, maybe it was an inside job or something like that. That's That's hard for me to accept from a logistical standpoint.
Yeah, I don't believe that either.
You know,
I'm with you. I just wanted to play devil's advocate with you right there.
For sure. And so this brings us to like argument 3.5 for why the Houthis didn't do it, or argument number 1 for why Iran did it. And it's that we're getting some evidence that's coming out very recently of recovered, unexploded drones and cruise missiles that seem to be the Iranian. They seem to be of Iranian build. And it's funny because I joked about this with someone earlier that, it's not like fucking, how are they going to prove it was Iran? It's not like they're going to pick one up and be like, it says just made in Iran right across the side. But evidently that seems to be what happened. But here's the thing. I looked at those photos, and they're actually quite good. They're very clear. It does look like the Delta Wing drones that Iran operates. And, that's crazy. The one thing I'll say on this one is that, people sell weapons all over the place, right? Iran is definitely selling their weapons to people. Just because it's an Iranian weapon doesn't mean that Iran did it. Because if we're going along that logic, then we have to say that every strike on Yemen that was with, an American fighter jet was actually an American strike. That doesn't make any sense. We just sold the weapons to Saudi Arabia, and they did it. The guns don't kill people, people kill people, as the NRA folks say.
That's a good point.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I hate that argument, by the way.
Guns don't kill people, I kill people.
Right. I hate that argument in general, but I don't want to go on a liberal tangent here. In any case, the point being is that they have recovered some of these things. Whether or not these unexploded things were actually involved in this attack, or they're just fabricating this evidence because it fits a narrative, is unclear, right? And I don't want to peddle a conspiracy theory because I don't know. But one thing that I do want to talk about is a recap on this limpet mine issue that happened a few months ago.
Let's just do a quick recap for new listeners who haven't been following our coverage of it.
For sure.
You guys probably know there's been ever since Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, the Iran deal, there has been a lot of tension between the U.S. and Iran. Yes, there's always been tension between the U.S. and Iran, but there's been a lot. It's definitely
increasing for sure.
It's increasing, and it definitely hit a spike back in the summer when the U.S. Decided that they weren't going to extend waivers to all these other countries that were currently purchasing oil from Iran, because Iran produces a lot of oil as well, and a lot of countries like Japan and China, which are huge oil markets, they buy a lot of oil from them. In the U.S. that we're not going to extend your waiver, so you can't buy anymore. After that, a lot of tensions flared up in those straits. Now, the big one was when Japan actually went down to Iran on a diplomatic mission. They were trying to find a solution, either find a way for Iran to trade again, to negotiate some type of sanction relief, find a extension, to get a way to extend waivers, which have been extended actually in the meantime. However, they were really just trying to ease tensions in the Persian Gulf, because what you really need to understand is that the U.S. gets most of its oil from its neighbors, so the U.S. and Mexico and itself. They don't really get that much oil from the Middle East. With the Europeans, a lot of them get their oil from Russia. So the countries that really are thirsty for oil, Middle Eastern oil, are Asian countries. So it's in Japan's interest to go over and to make sure that their ships aren't exploding in the Persian Gulf, that there's not going to be a war there, that's not going to be dangerous. So it was really ironic and weird that the ship that actually ran into some trouble, that hit a mine, apparently, the story is still not clear, was a Japanese ship, while Shinzo Abe was on a diplomatic mission to Iran. Now, what made the story really strange is that the limpet mines, they have to be attached to ships. That ship was coming from China, which means that like most likely the limpet mine wasn't attached on the ship from in China. So someone would have had to
swim up on the ship, like like they would see you. Not to mention ships move, like those big freighter ships move at about 11 miles an hour, which doesn't sound very fast on land, but in water it's incredible. It's like it's moving, and that's a moving target. You'd have to get up real close to it, and you'd have to get there undetected, and I don't buy that. That's crazy.
In the footage and the evidence that was presented, this wasn't really very conclusive. It was just really the hole in the ship, and what else was there was just the proof that they were like, oh, these are the Iranians meddling with something that they're not supposed to. It was just the Iranian Coast Guard rescuing people from the ship.
Right, and it did appear like they were doing something sketchy against the ship.
It didn't really look that bad. It just looked like they were observing it.
Right, I mean, they were touching the ship and they were doing something. I don't know what the fuck they were doing, but like the point is that the video was super
They were observing
grainy.
the explosion. Like they weren't. There was nothing from that picture that made me think that they were doing anything malicious. It just literally looked like if a fireman is going to. If they're rescuing people and there's a hole, unless that hole is still on fire or something like that, then I don't know. They're probably going to look at it. It didn't look suspicious to me.
Right. Well, I mean, even if it did look suspicious, which in my opinion it did look a little suspicious, the point was that it was a super grainy video and it wasn't conclusive at all. And everybody, everyone who has a brain was like, yeah, that looks a little weird, but like that doesn't mean that they did it. That's just
a hole in the ship.
It looks weird. And then the U.S. said that they were gonna give out some evidence, that they had evidence and stuff like that. And later actually they did. Like the U.S. Navy actually released some good photographs of the magnet that was attached to the hull of the ship. That the magnet was used for the unexploded limpet mine. And I saw the picture and it looked like what they said it was, right? But the point is that it took them a minute for them to produce this evidence. And when they did produce the evidence, literally nobody found out about it. I didn't even find out about it until literally today when I was doing research for this particular topic. And my point is that if that was conclusive evidence that it was Iran that did that particular limpet mine attack on that oil tanker, that there would be much bigger implications, and then we'd be still talking about it, And so, it just doesn't seem credible. It doesn't seem credible. And so when we see a lot of these drones, which, this does present some evidence towards their argument, they claim that they found these drones and these unexploded cruise missiles north of the facility, so farther north, right? So if you were to track the trajectory of where they came from, you can point a general line and direction towards Iran, right? And you can say that. And the fact that they are or appear to be Iranian weapons is also pretty damning in that respect. But the fact is, and it still remains, that if this is the conclusive fucking evidence for it, that this would be a really big deal, and I just don't see this as that. Like nobody is conclusively saying like it was definitely you. I mean, even President Trump is like, I don't know, we'll see, we'll figure it out, and the likelihood is that this will blow over, and that maybe they'll release some additional evidence, but we'll move on to the next topic, and then nothing happens, which doesn't make me feel super confident that this is in fact Iran.
Yeah, it's. I see it playing out the same exact way, that it's going to blow over. People are going to talk about talking again, and then it's going to be, you're going to almost forget about it until the next crisis happens in the Middle East, which God knows what. But the game-changing thing that will provoke the U.S. into war would be dead Americans.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, Danny Sherson, he wrote an article recently that we read, that talks about, a lot of this kind of inconclusive or even falsified evidence for, provoking a war, right? And he points out a couple really good examples that I want to bring up here again. Because I think it's healthy to be kind of skeptical about the information that we get, because in many situations in U.S. history, but also broadly in world history here, we've seen false pretenses for war. Obviously, the big one that everyone knows and talks about is, the false pretenses for going into Iraq in 2003, where we said that they had, nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction and like all this other shit, and we found nothing, right? Nevertheless, it got us into a giant war that's still mostly happening.
And not to mention with the Iraq war, and we were talking about this in the last one, but like I think we're gonna do. I'm planning on doing, and I think you would want to do it as well. A one podcast that's dedicated to this subject.
But let's
the evidence that was used in the Iraq war was blatantly there were forgeries.
Right.
There were forgeries in cartoon pictures that were produced out of one obsolete office out of the Pentagon called the Office of Special Plans. That the whole goal of that office was to create a condition where the U.S. went to war with Iraq. Now, Danny,
I just want to run through a couple of these specific examples because it's not just the 2003 Iraq deal, right? That's the one everybody knows about, and like I don't want to be like a just stuck on that one point because there's more than that, right? So we have the Gulf of Tonkin here in Vietnam, which started the Vietnamese War, whereby it was purported that North Vietnamese ships fired on the U.S. Navy vessels, and that was questionable evidence in context. But if we take it real far back, 1898, the Spanish evidently attacked the USS Maine in Havana's harbor, which stirred up a bunch of war fever here, and that spurred on the Spanish-American War. And then, basically we just gobbled up a bunch of the Spanish colonies for that. Like we just land grabbed at that point. But that was the pretenses. And it actually turns out that, not only was Spain not behind that explosion, but it was probably an accident that they just capitalized on. Another example, going even further back to 1846, President Polk basically invented a bullshit lie about a skirmish with Mexican troops that happened in the U.S. And as a result, we fought a war and we seized a third of Mexico, and that's now Texas. Basically, another example, even farther before that, the War of 1812, we rationalized our response in the war leading up to the War of 1812 on the British sailors seizing U.S. ships and sailors in the sea, and then London had declared that they agreed to cease the practice, and then afterwards we declared war, which was crazy. And then instead of going to war with Britain, we ended up trying to go conquer Canada, scoop up some Canada, and they spanked us. So there's that. This goes on and on and on, and the point here is that, we are, I don't want to say you should always doubt the information that comes to the U.S. government. I think that's a bad thing to do. Like we should have some level of trust in our intelligence. We should have some level of trust in our military. But this doesn't preclude us from making these blatant mistakes, right? And what happens is when we use these false pretenses and get into wars, fucked up shit happens, it's just we have to be very fucking critical of this because the implications are dire. We don't want to start World War III, and Bolton is probably clapping and fucking also kicking himself at the same time because he's no longer got the president's ear on this. He'd be screaming about we got to go to war. Look, we found their drone shit and yeah, it's definitely them. We got to do something now,
Yeah. Thank God he's gone.
Yeah, but, seriously.
It's a blessing that he, I'm still really not sure how Trump would be reacting to Bolton right now if he was still there, if he would still have him sitting in a corner, or if John Bolton would be talking all that crazy rhetoric. I mean, he would be speaking all that crazy rhetoric. However, at that point, Bolton seemed kind of obsolete since the Hanoi summit.
Right.
I think Trump got pretty frustrated with him. To Trump's credit, all right, I'm going to give Trump a little credit. He definitely, he's been like kind of doing a good job fighting off a lot of the really bad people in his administration, but he's also put them in power in the first place. So it's like, it's really difficult to give him credit.
Yeah.
It's a huge contradiction.
It's weird.
We'll go into another episode because we can talk about that all day. But I want to get into the Q&A
Cool.
section of it because I think we wrapped it up, and we're only going to go through one question this time around. We'll answer your other questions, but this one was pretty big news. So did you read the Politico article about Israel spying on Trump?
No, this is actually the first time we're hearing about this. I'm hearing about this today.
So I did read that Politico article. It was released a couple of days ago, and basically it's Politico published an article, and what it was is that there were some people from the State Department that said that basically said that the Israelis had I forget, read the Politico article, they'll have all the details, but they had they were collecting data on I think high-ranking members in the Trump White House's phones. They were tracking their phones and collecting data from them. Mm-hmm. And Trump came out and was like, Israel, were you spying on us? And they were like, no. And they're like, they said no. They said he wasn't spying on us. So, all right, there's two things that I want to just bring up on this. And one, I believe the article because Israel has spied on the U.S. a lot of times, so
nothing new.
Like, it's not like something that's surprising. I'm more surprised that Politico published the article, to be completely honest. But I want to go to the second point, and I think this is more of an indictment on just most journalistic publications in general, including just in everyone, is that everything is sourced by everything's anonymous sources.
Right.
Like every single article that comes out is always the source is always an anonymous source, and I understand why you do it. You can't reveal your sources, especially when that source is going to be either in danger of losing their job or even worse. You don't want to reveal your sources, but it just, to me, like when I read these articles that just like everything's anonymous, and we went through it with Russiagate and with this as well. I mean, I believe this is more credible just because of the history of the situation. But with Russiagate, everyone was anonymous. Everyone's anonymous. Every single story, everyone's anonymous, and it's just, I wish that sources could be revealed, or at least because a journalist can just make everything up. They can just be like, yeah, I spoke to somebody from the State Department. I mean, he said that Trump likes to bathe in piss and he shits in the shower. Like, that could be a story, and you write that up.
Heard it here.
Like an anonymous source from the intelligence, from an anonymous intelligence agency says that Trump shits in the shower.
But the implications, of course, and this is the counterpoint there, is that a lot of these cases, maybe not in the Trump shits in the shower situation, but like definitely in situations where you've got sources on the ground who, if they were found out about that they're leaking information or that they're even talking at all, that their lives could be in danger.
They weren't leaking information. They were just like talking. Like they didn't leak any documents.
Right. And we're not talking specifically about like, the Israeli portion of this, but I'm talking about like, you're in a war zone, and, if you're found out, somebody can kill you, or you
lose your job.
You lose your job. But that's
the consequence that these guys are facing.
Right.
They're most likely not going to be killed over this, but
of course not. But like even still, like you could lose your job, you could lose your credibility, your reputation, and that could be extremely damaging to you. But of course, it goes all the way up to loss of life. So I understand why some sources have to be anonymous. But at the same time, I agree with you in the respect that it really kills the credibility here, and really what I think this boils down to, and the point that I made in the V1 of this show, is that we're living in a world where we want the information now, right? We want to know right now what the fuck is going on, and we want to know as much of it as possible. And unfortunately, in order to get that done quickly, we have to rely on these anonymous sources. Now, in order for us to find out, the topic of this show, for example, what happened with these limpet mines, what happened with the drone strike, like what actually happened, this could take years to uncover all of the evidence and be able to point to firsthand sources that are allowed to speak about it before we ever find out, before we can ever read the book that's written about this.
Yeah, and it's really true. It's such a good point. Like, we probably won't know. It will probably be a while until a really good book comes out that really tells the story of Trump and Iran, or the book on Trump in the Middle East. I think it'll be an incredibly important book. It will be really telling. And, we just don't have all that information. It's going to take a while and a lot of context and a lot of
hard journalism,
hard research to really just discover everything that went on in the Trump White House between John Bolton. Because now we get instant stuff in headline news and instant clicks. And, we have an idea of what's going on, but, and I can't wait for those books to come out that reflect on this time that we've been engaged in politics.
It'll be called Trump, the Commander in Tweet.
Trump, the Commander in Tweet. I want to read the book on Trump and Iran.
Yeah.
That will be really interesting. I mean, there already is stuff like that, but a good book. I mean, a good book on Trump
Fire
and Iran.
and Fury, you mean?
What's that?
Fire and Fury, you mean?
No, not Fire and Fury.
I actually started listening to that book, and I literally stopped after like the third chapter.
Was the Gorilla Channel on that, or was that a parody?
I don't know. I never.
There's something about
the
Gorilla Channel. I can't read all that shit. I'm just not interested in like the MSNBC clickbait, like the E news of the Trump White House. Listen. I like to criticize Trump on stuff that I think is warranted, and I think that the stuff that when you criticize somebody and it's over like celebrity tribalism or whatever you want to call it, it discredits things that they actually do wrong. So I think you need to hold your politicians accountable, praise them when they're doing well, and shit on them when they're not doing well. And that accounts for anyone across the aisle, Republican or Democrat, whatever you are. Don't be a political basic bitch. Use your mind and don't just join one side or like someone or hate someone because it's like part of the political branding manifesto in society. Like, I think that's just really stupid. Like Obama, for example, there's things I fucking hate about Obama, but there's things that I really give him credit for as well. So, it's you got to take the good and the bad and make your own opinions about these politicians and their policy and all that. I don't even know how we got to that. We were answering a question about the political article. All right.
Sounds like a good stopping point, yeah.
This is the second time we did this. Guys, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Bro History. Please rate and review the podcast. Number one way to support the show still. We're at 170 reviews as we record this, so I think we'll get to 200 soon. So we need your help doing that, obviously. So give us a nice rating on Apple if you have it. Check us out on Patreon as well. We're releasing more content there, and it really helps us grow along with that. All right, Danny, any words?
Yep. Last little bit. We love doing these Q&As. We get some really good questions. So if you have a question that you want us to talk about on the show, send that to info@brohistory.com. We totally promise it's a real email that we actually read. So go ahead and send over a question. If you got an article you want us to check out, or if you got a topic in mind that you think would be cool to explore, or you just want to ask us a personal question, like, go for it, and maybe we'll talk about it on the show.
Yeah, info@brohistory for questions. It actually, I love it. I love this format, and it really helps us. It just helps the show out a lot because it just gives us like places to jump at, and you guys, the people who've been emailing us have asked like awesome questions, and just keep on doing that. Like, just keep on sending us questions. They really help the show out.
All right.
All right. Peace, guys.
See ya.